它只有一个片。
Okay.
Okay. So, while people are making their way into the room, let me just remind you about dinner tonight, that if you have any changes of your plans, then please let my colleagues know out on the reception desk. We would like to see as many of you as possible there, of course. It's going to be a really nice evening, I believe. So we're going to start the next session, and it's called Climate Policy Developments. And this is, of course, a very broad topic. As we know, let's say from the beginning, climate discussions tended to be about reducing the emissions only, but since then it has expanded into almost every area of activity. So this is a session where we will try to capture many of these different discussions. Yeah, I forget always to show this slide. That's me again. This is not so much for the benefit of you in the room, more for the people online. So I'm head of environment and climate change at worldsteel. I will moderate this session, and in fact the session afterwards as well. Before we have a panel discussions, we have two presentations that are looking at the policies that are out there today, and what they cover and how they concern the steel industry. So let me first introduce to you Michele Rimini. He's head of steel decarbonization at the OECD, and previously has also worked in the Global Forum of Steel Excess Capacity. So Michele, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Osa. Thank you, everybody, for this invitation. It's an honor to be here. I'm joined here today with the colleagues Dan Hakugu, who has been a driving force of the work that we'll be presenting today. Today, we will present some work that we've done at the OECD on how companies are transitioning towards net zero and what are the policies that are facilitating that process. This, of course, happens in a context of long-standing structural challenges that the sector is facing. But let me start with a little of an introduction of what is the role of the OECD here. It's important to highlight that the OECD Steel Committee aims to support the viability of the steel industry through policies that reduce market distortion and promote competitive and open markets for steel. And it's a key belief of us that decarbonization and excess capacity are key drivers for structural adjustment in the sector. And our goal here is really to help governments to make sense of these two intertwined challenges through our regular activities and some activities that we've been adding over the course of the year. This includes the monitoring of steel market developments, namely looking at capacity, supply, demand, and raw materials development, the assessment of excess capacity and its root causes, the monitoring of trade flows and the trade policies, as well as the monitoring of other government intervention in the sector, to which I will add the recent work I've been doing on decarbonization. And zooming in on our work on decarbonization for the current biennium, we have a set of projects that we are currently conducting. The first one is a set of indicators that we're building on progress in decarbonization. The second is a report that I will discuss today on how the steel industry is reacting to the challenge of decarbonization and how policies are facilitating the industry in this endeavor. We had a project that looked at the circular economy and scrap, and we will be soon working on a paper on hydrogen and as a new strategic input for the industry. Last but not least, we will be holding a workshop on technological solution in October, for which details will follow. If we move to the rationale for this report and the question we've been trying to address there are the following one. The first question is, how are steel companies adapting to the low carbon transition and what are the related challenges? And related to that, we ask ourselves, how can policies help address these challenges? But there are also a set of underlying questions that relates to the broader challenges that the sector is facing. An example of that is how we can foster the competitiveness of low carbon emission steel and how the low carbon transition can facilitate steel firm structural adjustment. Last but not least, it's important that we also look how the low carbon transition and the low carbon facilities coming online do not really feed or exacerbate the current excess capacity problem. And if I go a little bit into what we've been done in this report, we'll be really looking at companies' decarbonization strategies, pathways and projects to identify what is the state of play by looking at the top steel producers for each region. We have tried to identify patterns in companies' decarbonization strategies, as well as looked into decarbonization challenges and mapped the policies that have been implemented to enable steel decarbonization, with the idea of deriving policy insights that facilitate the industry transition. If I can quickly touch upon the methodology that have been used, we have been looking at companies and policies, of course, and on the company side, we have been looked at interim reports, the company annual reports, white papers and articles, investigating a total of 229 low emission projects over a wide range of technologies, including energy efficiency, hydrogen, CCS, and other emerging technology, and looked at the investment size. As a source, we've been using World Steel Dynamics, as well as company annual report and the Green Steel Tracker. On the policy side, we have mapped 87 policies across 11 jurisdictions over a wider range of policy instruments, such as regulation, R&D, carbon pricing, funding, and so on and so forth, covering an array of technologies options that are available for steel. We try to categorize between supply side and demand side, phase in or phase out, and the challenges that have been addressed, that this policy is intended to address. As a source, we've used the Climate Club Policy Database, for which we'll hear a little bit more later on today, as well as Government Policy Briefing, and so on and so forth. In the next 3 slides, I'll touch upon what companies are doing for decarbonization and what are the challenges they are facing. In our sample, we see that 74% of companies say that they will use CCS, while 52% of the companies will use H2DRI, and only 11% are considering iron oxide electrolysis as an option for decarbonization. We all know from the discussion of today that most of these technologies have to reach full commercial scale, and that we're not there yet for them and to be completely implemented and being effective. On the right-hand side, you can see the trajectory of the emission reduction that the different technologies are bringing to the sector, showing that not all of them are reaching near zero. And this is somewhat some implication in as much as investing in technologies that seems to be cost-effective in the short run to reduce emission but do not reach net zero may lead to a situation of carbon lock-in beyond 2050, which is a little bit beyond the goal of the Paris Agreement. And we had this morning an important discussion on finance, on the size of investment that it's needed for the transition, and this is a key challenge for decarbonization, as you all know that low carbon technologies are highly capital intensive, and therefore they require a lot of investment. In this picture, you can see the number of projects as well as their investment size of projects that companies have announced. Of course, some of these projects have not yet reached the final investment decision, and still companies have to develop concrete investment plan. But still, there is movement there. Another set of challenges pertains to resources, in that decarbonization depends on resources that are limited at the minute. We discussed this morning CCS and H2 DRI. Of course, the CCS infrastructure might not be available at the scale that it's needed at this point in time. And the H2 DRI route depends on the availability of green hydrogen, as well as of high-grade iron ore with iron content. And of course, the issue of scrap, the scrap availability, it's an issue for the secondary route for steel production. We all know that green steel will cost a little bit more, even significantly more than brown steel produced through the traditional route. And therefore, demand signals are required for this green premium to be paid. And so far, demand signals are mostly driven by downstream industry voluntary commitment. And last but not least, if you want to reach the decarbonized steel production as for the technology profile depicted by the IEA, I mean, by 2050, there needs to be a significant closure of high emitting facilities so that both carbon objectives are achieved, as well as there's no risk to exacerbate excess capacity. If I move now to the current situation of steelmaking assets around the world, we see that the average age for BOF assets is above 40 years old in jurisdictions such as Canada, the United States, Japan, and the EU. And these are the jurisdictions where we find the largest number of decarbonization-oriented policies. This may signal that it's relatively easier to find buy-in for decarbonization policies in countries where capital expenditures have been amortized for longer periods. On the right-hand side, for net zero targets, we see that the OECD countries are sticking to the 2050 deadline, whereas developing nations are, in accordance to the common but differentiated responsibilities principle, are giving themselves some more time. As for the companies, we see that most of them follow what happens in their jurisdictions, with some exceptions, such as, for example, HBIS, who is advancing their decarbonization objective, also in line due to their international exposure of their business. If I move now from climate ambition to policies, here you can see the cumulative number of projects, the policies that have been announced and implemented over the years. As you can see, it's steeply increasing as a curve, and we have significant number of policies that have been implemented in the last couple of years, 2021, 2023. It is important to note that prior to 2018, the policies were mostly focused on energy efficiency, while after 2018 there has been a greater diversification of targeted technology by policy, ranging from hydrogen, CCS, scrap, and bioenergy. And if we compare the focus area between what are the focus of companies' low carbon emission project and the policies, we note that companies have been mostly focusing on energy efficiency, whereas policies have been prevalently focusing on providing technology agnostic support in according to the principle of technology neutrality, as well as the principle of fair competition of the beneficiaries of this type of support. On the contrary, we see that scrap is an important area for policy development, whereas companies do not seem to particularly focus on this strategy as part of the decarbonization portfolio. The policy mapping exercise also shows that there is a significant difference in policy attention to the various challenges of low-carbon steelmaking. In the left-hand side picture, you see that most policy attention goes to the supply side and phase-in side of the equation, and less to the demand side, which results in having the most commonly addressed challenge being the technological scale-up, the securing of resources, and as well the provision of investment. On the flip side of that, the exit of high emission intensive plants and the demand for low carbon steel has been less addressed by policy intervention. And if you just zoom in into the exit of emission intensive plants, which is an important topic for both decarbonization and excess capacity, we find that there is a few policies that relate to carbon pricing, the ETS in different jurisdictions, and the long-standing ban on new capacity addition in China. I think we discussed already this a little bit today, this morning. We also believe that we need to look at decarbonization from the perspective of the entire value chain, which means that the net zero steel value chain requires really a set of enabling conditions. And these are a reliable system of renewable-based electricity generation, an enabling infrastructure and a sufficient supply of hydrogen, as well as a hydrogen strategy that prioritizes steel and other heavy industries as primary end users, as well as an enabling infrastructure for CO2 transport and storage. And the evidence there is that we haven't found much evidence of support in jurisdiction on these specific topics. Finally, I'll make a quick detour to Southeast Asia to assess the meaning of the recent capacity developments vis-à-vis the challenge of decarbonization. On the left-hand side, you have the cumulative number of projects announced up until 2030. And on the right-hand side, you have a set of low-carbon projects that have been also announced. So the question that we've been asking there were, is there any sign of leapfrogging in capacity development? And are there any decarbonization-oriented policy support? The answer to the first question is that we see some projects and companies being aware of the challenge. However, we understand that not everything in net zero from the start, and relative to the total announcement, this is a relatively small subsample of what we're expected to see coming online in the region. As for decarbonization, and for the second question, that is decarbonization-oriented policy support, we find very low evidence of that happening in that specific region of the world. Let me conclude with a summary of key findings and policy insights. On the company strategies, we see that the majority of steel companies have set decarbonization objectives with a decarbonization roadmap. However, we also find that companies' decarbonization plans will benefit from being more detailed and comprehensive, saying when this is going to happen and what is going to happen and how this is going to happen. The other important element is that less than 1/3 of companies have targets that are based on climate change mitigation scenario analysis. On the policy mapping side, as I said before, there is much focus on the supply side and phase-in, whereas the focus on demand side and phase-out is limited and is risking to hamper achieving net zero as well as creating excess capacity. We have a very good discussion today on this already, but the real point there is also that policy approaches we really have to adapt to rapid advances in low-carbon steel making, and that the competitiveness of low-carbon steel as well, the rapid exit of the emission plants required carbon pricing, demand-side intervention, as well as direct market shaping. Finally, if we look at the correlation between company strategy and policy frameworks, we see that the more ambitious a country net zero target, the more ambitious the companies targets will be, and in some cases, even more so, as there are some companies that see decarbonization as a selling point for their product. Energy efficiency has been and continues to be an important part in company strategies and policy perspective. This is also due to the prevalence of the BF route, and also in relation to the latest commitment that countries have taken at COP around energy efficiency. We also emphasize the importance of close coordination around the value chain. This is absolutely important. And finally, I'd like to emphasize that despite it being an important element of the transition, both from the perspective of excess capacity and decarbonization, there has been limited attention given to the just transition issues brought from the company strategies and the policy perspective. With that, I conclude and look forward to discussing. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'll use this one. Thank you very much, Michele. I'm particularly interested in that you brought up the just transition at the end, because it's in fact a relatively new topic to us at World Steel as well, not something that we have discussed a lot within the industry, or at least all of us together. But as you might know, we have a session on just transition tomorrow, so we're really looking forward to bringing some more attention to that. Before I let you go, let's just see if there are any specific questions to Michele. Feel free to raise them now. Otherwise, of course, many of these topics we'll bring up in the panel discussion. There, yeah, there's a question there. Yeah, please take the microphone. Yeah.
Thanks so much. A quick question for the value chain. That I want to ask you how to improve the value of the green steel or steel with the high energy efficiency in global value chain. Currently, there is no mandatory, no trade requirement, global trade deals on this value chain. Value chains rules. So what's your suggestions? The second question about just transition. What's just transition for whom? For the mineral or resource producing countries like DR Congo, or you will encourage these countries can get more values from this global steel production, or just to try to make just redistribution of the value from the whole steel just transition process. Because as you know, all the global south countries talk about just transition. They want to get more from this steel's low carbon producing. Thank you.
Difficult questions, but
thank you. This is an important and very difficult question. Thanks for asking. I might just react on the just transition. I think we have two dimensions to look at the just transition. The first one is looking at the community of workers and people that are engaged in the current steel production system. That is looking at the workers in BF facilities, and how they can transition towards producing, being part of the value chain that is the decarbonized one. And there's a lot of things to do, and I think the discussion earlier this morning already highlighted that we have a path towards reskilling and making sure that we don't lose these people, because they're absolutely important. As for the second leg of this question around resources and distribution of steel production around the world, I think that the jury is still out on how much steel value chain will be reshaped by decarbonization, and we've heard today on the question relative to moving industry towards where energy is cheaper, or moving energy towards where industry is producing already. So it's an important challenge and something that we will see coming up. But of course, it's important to keep in mind all these aspects also in terms of resources, iron ore resources and renewable resources, and where these value chains can be more equally distributed globally.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, if there's anyone who wants to raise them. Well, let me just also comment on the questions, maybe, that these topics will be coming up. As Michele was commenting, these are really key topics, and they will be, I think, recurring in the different discussions throughout this event. So thank you again very much. All right. Then it's time to present our second speaker for this session. So I'm proud to introduce Joschka Rosenbusch, head of unit for the interim Climate Club Secretariat at the OECD. So I hand over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joschka Rosenbusch. Many thanks for the introduction. And I thank worldsteel for inviting the Climate Club to be part of this program today. My presentation will be a little bit shorter because we are splitting up basically the scene setting set up here. At the Climate Club, we did a mapping exercise of policies. And Michele already alluded to it. That was also used in his analysis. And I will share some of the 7 first findings that we have from this report. But also I would like to use the opportunity to briefly introduce the Climate Club. I guess some of you have already heard of the Climate Club. It is an intergovernmental initiative of so far 38 countries that have joined to cooperate with the purpose of accelerating the climate ambition and focusing mainly on industry decarbonization. I leave the flags here open so you can check whether your country is part of it, because it matters if you're part of the club or not. It's an open club, so open for membership, and it's governments only. So the Climate Club's goal is to accelerate climate action and increase ambition, and particularly in the field of industrial decarbonization. The format of how the Climate Club works between the governments is of an intergovernmental forum for discussion, so a little bit a talk shop, if you wish, but also an enabling framework for increased coordination and cooperation, and there's important collective action. Yeah? So governments want to address issues of industry decarbonization collectively by overcoming some of the hurdles and use the Climate Club as a framework for this. The initial focus on industry side is on steel and cement. There could be potentially other industries that could come up in the future, but for now, this is the focus. As I said, 38 members, Germany and Chile are the co-chairs of the initiative. And the interim secretariat is hosted by the OECD and the IEA. So I'm working on the OECD side, basically just a few doors away from the colleagues that are working on the Steel Committee, etc. The Climate Club is a relatively new initiative. It was officially launched only last December at the COP in Dubai. So we are still a little bit in the startup phase, if you like, trying to get the foot on the ground and see how it all can work out. But already, let's say, implementing first activities. And the reference, it came out of a G7 initiative. So the terms of reference have been adopted on leaders level at the G7 summit in Elmau in 2022. And if you want to learn more about the Climate Club, please check out our website, where you would find inter alia, the work program for this year. The work that we are conducting is based on 3 pillars. So the first pillar is about advancing ambitious and transparent climate change mitigation policies. And here we basically have 2 focuses, and both topics, I think, came up already during the day. The one is intensity metrics and carbon intensity measurements of products in the steel and cement industry. And the second one is how to, let's say, deal with potential positive and negative spillovers from climate policies and provide kind of a forum for discussion and conversion between positions from governments around these. The second pillar is about transforming industries, where we would be facilitating work on standards and definitions, as many other initiatives. And maybe I have to say, here the work is building on other initiatives. The IEA is part of the Secretariat, so we are relying a lot of their work, also work that has been done already in the IDDI, etc. Then promotion of markets, lead market development, pledges maybe from governments to create these demands, and then toolkit for industrial decarbonization, so policy toolkits. And the work that I'm presenting here is one of the first, let's say, outlets of this third pillar that you see down there with the red square. The third pillar is focusing on international cooperation and partnerships, which is mainly addressing how industrial decarbonization can be addressed in developing countries and emerging economies by looking into financial flows, but also into how financing instruments to mobilize private capital can be best used, and establishing a matchmaking platform for demand, for support and supply. Stakeholder engagement is a key success factor for us. This is why we are also engaging with industry associations, and I will come to this a little bit later. Okay, so the steel carbonization mapping is meant to develop some insights into how different steel-producing economies are currently supporting the decarbonization of the steel industry and what are differences between them. Our first set of countries that we have looked into include these 15 countries that you see here. We plan to include more in a future mapping. And the first insights that we have developed now are, let's say, preliminary findings. We are still working on the analysis, and additions are coming in. So the total set of policies that we have mapped are plus 200 in these 15 jurisdictions. So I will present first initial findings. Some of them have already been kind of shared by Michele, because we are using the same data set. So first message, all 15 countries have implemented some sort of industrial decarbonization policies that are relevant for steel, but there's a strong variation in the amount of policies. So we are not talking about the efficiency, the effectiveness of the policies. We also have not mapped what kind of resources are behind these policies. It's just the sheer number of policies. And maybe something remarkable, you see that the European Union obviously has implemented quite some policies on industrial decarbonization. And interestingly, for example, the difference between France and Germany, who are both, let's say, under these jurisdictions, you see that there are differences, even within EU member states, adding to what the EU has already implemented. Second, there's a notable increase in steel decarbonization policies in recent years. So the total numbers relate to policies that are in place. And I think there's a steep increase around the Corona recovery packages. Yeah? So steel has been integrated in some of these policies, as we know. And we also see that there's a strong increase around these topics. Third finding, and Michele already mentioned this, policies primarily target the supply side. So demand side policies have not really been taken up in scale. Then what is quite important also, most policies that we found are non-mandatory, with a focus, let's say, on the carrots and not so much on the sticks. And interestingly, I mean, this is the policy stringency that we have assessed. Interestingly, you would also see the differences maybe in the let's say in how governments address the topic. Yeah, let's say the thicker the yellow-red bar is on the top, you would see more, let's say, maybe more a regulatory approach to address this. While the looser or the thinner it is, you would see much more voluntary or strategic policies that are being set in place. Voluntary also includes subsidies, yeah? Or grants that are being provided. Fifth finding, that policies usually don't specifically target the steel sector, but are embedded into larger policies, or let's say larger policies that are addressing high-emitting sectors more broadly. But again, here you also see differences between some of the countries. I think India is remarkable here, who has implemented quite a set of, let's say, steel-specific policies that are only targeting the sector. The objectives that we have also checked, and sorry, I think there's the graphic is not showing it properly, also vary around countries. but there is a strong support for medium to low readiness technologies, as we heard earlier, CCUS, etc. So a lot of resources is being deployed or policies are being implemented that address the policy development, the technology development. And you see that other policies are relatively lesser, policy fields are relatively lesser addressed. And then the last slide or the last finding is that there is a variety of instruments that is being used with the grants, which is the black item at the bottom, being one of the strongest, let's say, instruments that is currently being deployed in numbers. Target setting is also quite an important dynamic that we are seeing. Standards and guidelines and research programs, and let's say less focus is being put on other policy instruments such as export restriction or training programs, even though we also see them obviously in the market. So these are the 7 findings. I think my time is up. If you allow me one more slide, okay. So as I mentioned earlier, the Climate Club is interested in cooperating with the industry, with industry stakeholders. So we have a workshop upcoming, a roundtable for steel and cement industry, where we would like to look into the emission intensity and definitions and standards for near zero steel and cement. So the discussions around the topics will flow into the overarching work of the Climate Club, inform decisions that can potentially be taken by the Climate Club members. And here we are looking for participation from experts on carbon intensity metrics, definitions and standards, from the steel and cement sector, from associations, so from national associations of the Climate Club membership, so this is why important if the flag is up or not, but also regional and international associations are always invited, and I think we will liaise afterwards on how we can bring in as many as possible into these roundtables. So if you're interested in joining and it applies to you, please send an email to the Secretariat email down there, or I have some leaflets here, I can also share it with you. And finally, we collected some questions out of our 2 presentations. So the first one from my presentation is if the findings that we have, or the draft findings, are in line with the assessment of the colleagues who will join the panel now, with the policy landscape in the respective country or jurisdiction that they are representing. And the question towards the future, how would you expect that this policy landscape will further evolve? Yeah? Will we see different policies to come up? And then, let's say, taking a step back to the presentation from the steel team, what else companies should do and what else governments should do. And with this, I leave it to you to moderate the panel. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
All right, thank you very much for that. So both presentations kind of touching on the same thing, overlapping a little bit, but giving you a broader perspective, I believe. Let's see if there are any questions specific for Joscha before I let him go here. Yes, please go.
Hello, my name is Lisbeth. I work at Cargill Metals. My question is as follows. So I see a lot of policy counting and so on. I wonder, in the final report, will there also be a feedback loop as to what impact do these policies have? Have you thought of indicators that can tell you a bit more about the impact?
Yeah, very good question. No, deliberately, we are not assessing the effectiveness of the policies for now. This was a decision by the Climate Club members that they don't want to end up in a situation in where they are, let's say, being compared about the effectiveness of the policies that they are implementing to go, let's say, public in such a report. Yeah? So there will be setups in which the Climate Club members, governments will discuss among each other about the effectiveness of their policies. But let's say the work on the policy mapping does not include the effectiveness of these policies. Yeah? For now. I mean, as I said, we are still in a startup phase and trying to figure out how, what the appetite of these kind of discussions could be. But maybe if I can, there's another OECD initiative. It's called the IFCMA, who is looking into effectiveness of climate policies that go beyond, including for industry, but also beyond industry. So they have scheduled, let's say, reports on effectiveness of climate policies. Yeah. Inclusive Forum for Carbon Mitigation Approaches, IFCMA.
All right. Any more questions? All right. Then I will let you go. Thank you very much again. What's So after these two very interesting presentations, we are now moving into our panel discussion. So if I can ask all my panelists to come on stage here, please join me rather. Just leave this chair closest here to me, please. So on this panel we have Philip Bell, he's the president of the Steel Manufacturers Association. We have Alok Sahai, he's the Secretary General of the Indian Steel Association. Frank Askov, who is Energy and Climate Change Policy Manager, UK Steel. Helene Axelsson, who's Director Environment and Energy at Jernkontoret, which is the Swedish Steel Producers Association. And Huang Dao, who's the Deputy Secretary General, China Iron and Steel Association. And last but not least, Hiroyuki Tsuka, who is the Chair of the Energy and Technology Committee of the Japan Iron and Steel Federation. So, and maybe just let me also remind everyone that we do have simultaneous interpretation of this event between Chinese and English. We do have our headsets here for the panelists. We might not need it immediately, but in case there are any questions in Chinese, we should be prepared to use these, of course. As I mentioned in the beginning, climate policy, or the area, let's say the topic of climate policy is today very, very broad. We can see that in the climate, sort of in the general climate debate, and for example, in the topics that are being discussed in the UNFCCC and around the COPs, that have spread from talking mainly about mitigation to really cover everything, including finance and just transition and markets and trade and absolutely every aspect of basically everything that we do. So I'm hoping that with this panel here, we have a good set of countries with quite different approaches to some of these topics. And I'm going to direct specific questions to each and every one of you related to what's going on in your countries. But before I do, I would like to know if there's anyone who has any reactions to the presentations that we've seen who would like to add something. And Joschka put up these sort of guiding questions around, do you think this is a fair analysis? What do you expect sort of more broadly then, in a general sense, going forward? Maybe some other suggestions for the OECD and the Climate Club in terms of more analysis or different aspects that you would like to know. So I'll just open that floor if there's anyone who would like to make a comment. Yeah, okay, let's start with you, Hiro.
Okay, thank you. I very much appreciate the OECD reports. Both are very, very well written and represent the reality of the steel industry, current steel industry. And my focus or my point of the finding of the report was there's a lack of the focus on market development. And most of the policies, the current steel policies of all the regions are focusing on the green steel producing technologies, green steel producing supporting infrastructures and so forth. But still we are lacking in a green market. the massive amount of green market is necessary for the steel industry to invest billions of dollars. The financing is necessary. As the morning session described, $1 trillion the financing required. But to justify such kind of investment, we do need return on those investments. Return means the sales and the profit. Unfortunately, we have started selling greener steel under my company, JFE Steel, the J Greeks, but the market reaction is quite minimum. Only a selected customers are willing to pay the extra on the greener steel currently. But we do need the 100 times or 1,000 times more customers to support our investment on a greener steel.
Yeah, thank you, Hiro. So Helene, you wanted to comment as well, please.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, it does. Yeah, I think it's really interesting studies, and we'll all, of course, as the former question, like to also see the effect of the policies, which is interesting. I mean, those bars doesn't really show which of those measures that affect. I mean, in EU, we have had emission trading for 15 years, and probably the most efficient push that we've had. And I hope that within the Climate Club, all those discussions between the members you have will perhaps show how different measures could be, different policies could be appropriate in different stages. I do think that such as putting a price on carbon dioxide or emissions is a good step, a first step. Then when it comes to, in the end, creating the market, I do believe that steel industry has to create their own markets on the first hand. I think that's important. Otherwise, you're not really competitive.
Yeah, Frank, would you like to go? Yeah,
I just wanted to comment on this this discussion about when you introduce a market, when you introduce demand, because it's very much a chicken and egg situation. What do you do first? I think in the United Kingdom, when we had discussions about very strong demand policies, there was concerns from industry that if they were put in place before industry could actually decarbonize, you would create a signal to import loads of low emission steel from abroad rather than supporting domestic producers who were on their way to transitioning, or who were investing at the moment, or who were building plants but weren't quite ready to supply that low carbon steel yet. And this is again kind of when you introduce these strong demand signals, when you introduce the requirements for lower carbon in public procurement projects. And I think there was a general uneasiness of introducing them too soon, because effectively it would mean that suddenly the domestic industry wouldn't actually get a chance to decarbonize, because you would be buying steel from Hybrid in Sweden instead, which, while that is lovely, that is not generally something that we would want to encourage here.
Would you? Sorry, just leads me to ask you back. Would you say that when you introduce these, let's say, the more significant policies, that you really need some time before the policies are announced until they are put in place, because there is so much adjustments being needed to happen in the industry? So I was thinking about it. You mentioned the EU ETS, Helene, for example. That was, of course, been, let's say, phased in and gradually being stricter and so on, which hopefully has allowed the industry to kind of adapt to the system as we go along.
Yeah, and I think so. I think fundamentally, this is the issue: is that decarbonizing steel industry. I'm preaching to the choir here. People are very, very well aware it's not something you do within 12 months. Like at best of times, you can perhaps move to electric arc furnace within 5 years if you're working very, very fast. But CCUS, DRI hydrogen takes longer. So if you introduce signals too quickly, too soon without warning, you end up causing more harm than benefit. So I think very much need the foresight.
Yeah, I actually agree with Frank on being very careful. I think timing of sending demand signals are very, very crucial and important, and a lot of it depends on what region of the world you produce steel in. As far as the draft findings from the Climate Club, as well as the OECD report, three key areas are very much in line with the policy landscape in the United States. First of all, being ambitious. We think that ambitious goals are going to help us decarbonize our industry faster rather than supporting high emission steel production longer. I think also what's important is to really look at the success of non-mandatory policies. A case in point is in the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, is a perfect example of the carrot versus stick approach, where you're allowing incentives, where you are allowing tax breaks, and where you're allowing free market forces to drive decarbonization. And then from the OECD report also, I think that global excess steel capacity is a fundamental key driver to our decarbonization efforts. In fact, when you look at the capacity that is coming online, very little of it is following a low emissions steel production route.
All right, yeah. Mrs. Sai, if you would like to. No, you just speak.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So, typically, we made a assessment through, we had a consultant, and we went through a detailed assessment of what will be the impact of the decarbonization, what are the different scenarios we can carry. Do we go in a very accelerated manner or a very slow manner? If we go very slow, by 2040, 45, we will exhaust our budget, steel carbon budget for steel. And if we go in a very speedy manner, we can't afford that. It's beyond us. Somewhere in between, that's what they suggested. And even in that, the kind of leveled cost of steel, if we look at that, in immediate term it will increase. The prices would increase immediately by $20, almost $20, $15 to $20. Even that, customers wouldn't be ready to pay. And second thing is, even Bureau of Energy Efficiency, which is monitoring the new CCTS scheme which has come in India, which is replacing the earlier perform PAT scheme, we used to call it. That scheme has been replaced by a new CCTS scheme, like EU ETS. There again, there is no provision to pass on the cost to the customers. It's all you absorb, you reduce, you have a target, you were doing earlier also. So now you have a target, which is instead of 3 years, 1 year, and now you reduce you reach the goals which have been set for you, which will be given by BE. And that will be based on your total, emission targets. Not, on any particular energy goals, but total emission. Earlier it was equivalent to oil equivalent. Now it will be, GHG emissions. So there are no system of passing on the cost to the customer. So given that situation, it will be quite a challenge. But let me tell you, despite that, the fact that the top 6 players in India, they are investing heavily and they are very aggressive in terms of their commitments, ranging from 2035 to 2045. They would like to, 35 is too aggressive. I won't agree with that. But 2045 and 2050 is what they are aiming at to reach the net zero. For that, they have already started number of actions like, in terms of green hydrogen, in terms of renewable energy investment, hydrogen plants, every day something is happening. But from government side, which has to invest in terms, because they are almost 40% of the total steel buyer, somewhere they influence. There is a problem right now on that front.
Yeah, no, I can only agree. Mr. Huang Dao, would you like to make a comment as well? Yeah, okay, please go ahead.
I'm from China Iron Steel Association. I'm very thankful for the two presentations, excellent presentation about the policies. I'm also very thankful for the WSA has prepared this machine because my English is not good enough. It helps me to understand the presentation more, understand clearly. I agree that the gentleman said that the policy is very important and the target, the government target, make the industry, economical industry sections to decide what they do. Last forum, I introducing the China's two action about the green and low carbon goals. The target the China's government asked we must do. One is the ultra low pollution emission target. The government asked the iron steel industry 20% of the production ability in 25 years. By the end of the 20 years, the 80% must have to finish this target. This is one of our activities. So we investment a lot, the target and the investment. The investment in this area in addition year and year. So is on the potent steel investment about 80 euro potent steel production investment. The project. Another activities in energy saving and the energy efficient. The government's target is in the end of the 25 years, about 30% of the capability production need to advanced energy efficient benchmark. It's very difficult to get it. So it make the enterprises invent more to do this work. We choose the third actions project since last year. Today, this year we make the third. Third one is improve the level of the digital management. We think that it could make energy consumption unit support enterprises in building smart energy management platform and strengthen the collection, analysis, and the management dates of the consumption of the energy and energy consumption and the carbon emission. It's good for the future, green future. This is my industry section choose by ourselves. Yeah, it's my opinion.
Yeah, thank you very much for those comments. Well, I have prepared a question for each of you, more related to your specific sort of policy developments in your country. And let me start with you, Philip, coming back to the IRA that you mentioned, because when it was adopted, it was, I would say, a milestone in terms of climate policy. We also heard quite a lot of sort of envious voices around the world wanting to have a similar type of initiative in their country. So could you elaborate a little bit about, what has been achieved since it came into force, let's say, and sort of what are the next steps or the developments now?
Sure thing, Osa, and thank you very much. I know in the United States, industry is very pleased with the IRA, and the federal government is very proud of the IRA. It's a landmark achievement. It's the largest investment in climate policy in the United States history, and we are well on our pathway to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by between 45 to 50% less than they were in 2005 by 2035. So that's a huge accomplishment. Also, we have seen industry invest over $110 billion of its own money to help supplement the support that it is getting from the Inflation Reduction Act. But I think what's even more important is some of the new things that are being developed as a result of the monies that the IRA has made available. The Department of Energy has done a fantastic job, and they started this in March of this year, of implementing a program called the Industrial Demonstration Project, or IDP. What this is this is a competitive program in which steel companies submit proposals to the U.S. Department of Energy for evaluation, and then the Department of Energy selects companies that will receive money to help them decarbonize. I will give you two very specific examples that really stand out. One is by SSAB Americas, a Swedish-owned company that received $500 million to build a hybrid facility to help lead to decarbonization in steel production. SSAB was very successful with their hybrid pilot plant in Sweden, and lo and behold, that is making its way to the shores of the United States. And I think that that is extremely promising. Another project, $575 million, was awarded to Cliffs to help it install a hydrogen-ready DRI plant to help lower emissions in its production. It will be retiring a blast furnace and then replacing it with the hydrogen-ready DRI plant and 2 electric furnaces. So these are examples. Companies were competing for these money. The best projects prevailed, and they're all leading to decarbonization. And I think one of the things that we're going to see in the future from the IRA and just from policy in general in the U.S. is the encouragement of experimenting with new technologies and also rewarding first movers. I think for us to really move the needle in the United States, we need to have companies that are willing to be first, willing to be among the leaders, and they need some kind of support from government to take those risks, and I think that's going to be a trend going forward.
All right, these are very encouraging developments, I would say. Let me come back to you, Mrs. Sahai, and the Indian system. So you referred to it before, that there is a change now with the perform, achieve, and trade schemes. I'm not so intimately familiar with these schemes, but I believe that one was on energy efficiency, right? And now you're moving into a carbon trading scheme. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? And also something about the timeline, as in when is it going to be implemented? Maybe if you're already familiar with similarities or differences with existing schemes like the EU ETS, how you would compare them?
This has been going on since 2012. on the energy efficiency. We had this PAT scheme. It had 7 cycles, every 3 years, 1 cycle. So it has been going on since then. And we have, over a period of time, we have got 1,212 designated consumers who are now converted into obligated entities under the new scheme. And that they come from 13 energy-intensive industrial areas. Right now, CCTS is mainly focused on steel and aluminum right now. So that particular program is on what used to happen, that you have certain targets. If you achieve the target, beyond that, you get an e-certificate. Now, that was in 3 years. You were every 3 years you were measured. Now, every year you will be having a target which you will submit with a detailed plan, and the plan will be with how you will do it, and a detailed program has to be given to Bureau of Energy Efficiency, which is the authority on this, which will see what are the plans, what are the exact targets, what are the default values of all the material, and it is based on the input material, not emission intensity of the input material, not at each of the emitting points. Emission points are not being measured. So virtually it covers the entire plant, because any kind of entry in the plant of any kind of emission related material which comes in is measured. And the default value is attached. The value is then, there is a certified verifier who will be accredited by the agency, and they would, after you claim, they will be assessing your claim, and also do some kind of surprise checks and all those kind of stuff to make sure there are no variations. And anyone who earns more than, say 2.4 is the present base value, and you have achieved 2.2 is the goal. So if you have achieved 2, you get 0.2, and that carbon credit which you get, you can sell it in the market. There are, in addition to these, there are some independent projects they can join in, and they go with a baseline, and whatever extra they achieve, they also can sell or buy likewise. So it's expanding the market now. It's a beginning. So from 24-25, this is being introduced, and 25-26 onwards, it will be traded.
All right, we're looking forward to how the implementation goes, and the updates at our next occasion.
Right now I don't expect the cost of carbon would be very high, but if there are not enough people giving certificate, that will become expensive.
Yeah.
So, and it also depends how much tight targets are given by them. So I personally feel they will keep relaxed in the beginning, and they will tighten up once everybody joins in. It's only about 60-65% of the industry which is there. Mm-hmm. So once 100% joins in, I'm very clear they'll tighten and they will start asking to buy. And it is going to become very expensive. It's a matter of 2-3 years. Things would be difficult for everyone. So those who achieve, they will be forced to achieve. There is no option. Yeah. And what happens in case of Government of India, 2-3 things they have done very well. In case of renewable energy, huge commitments and good performance. Mm-hmm. Similarly, in case of hydrogen, they have given many kind of incentives in terms of land availability, tax concessions, various things. So I'm quite sure hydrogen will come in a big way. That's a recognition by government. And this new government has come, they're continued, same set of people have come. So their focus is very clear. Mm-hmm. So on both and these are the two main levers by which we can, reduce in terms of blast furnace. Also, scrap availability, they are trying to make it more modern, more organized, so that scrap, whatever limited is available, is used well. So these are some of the good levers we have right now.
Yeah, excellent. All right, let me go to you, Frank, and the situation in the UK. So for those of us who follow the steel industry developments in the media, I think we've all seen that there are some big changes being planned in the UK, with some UK steel producers announcing the changing of their production from integrated routes to scrap-based EAF. And of course, this will have big impacts on the UK's emissions, but also is going to have an impact on the companies themselves, the workers, the societies around them, and so on. What role does government policy play, or what could it play in these big shifts that we see, and how can we sort of minimize the negative impacts of these big changes?
No, good question. I think kind of like just to first comment on the US development, because I think kind of we are very jealous of what is happening in the US, because for many years you've seen both in the EU when the UK was part of the EU, but also and now where there's been a lot of stick. It's been taxing emissions, it's putting levies on electricity prices, it's targets, and if you don't meet them, there are fees to pay. And in a world of global an overcapacity, it kind of when you punish steelmakers instead of rewarding them for certain behavior, you will see production go down. And that's what we've seen across the EU, that's what we've seen in the UK. It's really gone one way with these punitive policies. I think now we're seeing kind of led by the US really a different route of doing it by having a lot of carrots in there. So we see a lot of the steel development, the decarbonisation happening across Europe is because government is intervening with significant state subsidies. And that's also what's happening in the UK now, where you're seeing for the first time in 20 years, massive investment in new steelmaking capacities. The issue is obviously that it does have implications for workers, in particular the plans that Tata Steel has announced for in South Wales. There is potential up to 2,800 redundancies and layoffs as a result of this switch from integrated to secondary production. But we have to consider what was the options really here. And I think kind of fundamentally the site and a lot of the assets were at the end of their life. They were falling apart, costing the company quite a lot of money. The alternative was CCUS, where there was no local storage. You'd have to extend the life of the CCUS, of the blast furnace. The business models that the government had created didn't really work. In the UK, hydrogen probably will be very expensive. Natural gas is much more expensive than it is in the US. So again, and it also doesn't solve the labour issue. It's fundamentally DRI hydrogen is as labour intensive as an electric arc furnace, broadly speaking. So what do you then do? Kind of fundamentally, they had the option of switching to electric arc furnaces or closing down. And obviously, they chose the former, which we're very happy with. We're seeing huge investments, but it does have implications for the workers, for the people who are no longer employed at the end of this process. So far, the UK government has set out a transition board where Tata Steel and the UK government is paying into a fund that is meant to provide funding for training, for reskilling, for local communities. You could ask again whether any kind of transition can be planned better. Could it be done over a longer period of time so that you have perhaps natural retirements and kind of no new hires? Could there be more funding for these kind of transition boards, reskilling, retraining, because they are very much needed so that we have this just transition. And I think that's probably where we would need to go. But ultimately, at the moment, we're just very happy that steelmaking will continue, that we are actually seeing now a complete switch over to electric arc furnaces in the UK, where the UK's steel sector's emissions will go down by about 80% as a result of these investments. So quite a dramatic drop. And now obviously we have an ample supply of scrap, so it's a very natural route, perhaps. So I'll leave that there.
It does, well, thank you for those comments, obviously. We won't go into the scrap issue now, but it is one that has been touched on several times. Of course, today that scrap is not being used in the UK, and when it will be, someone else will not be able to buy the scrap that they have become accustomed to. So that's another discussion that we might, come back to over the course of these 2 days. Let me now change topic, or rather come back to the issue of the demand side and related to that. So, Hiro, Japan has taken the lead in trying to get to common measurement standards. This was a push in the Japanese G7 presidency last year. The JASF, the Japan Iron and Steel Federation, is also the first one to have published mass balance guidelines, which is, of course, is part of this whole ecosystem of how you label and account for emissions and market green products, or low carbon steel, as I prefer to call them. Could you tell me why this is important? I think you touched on it before, but is this a specific interest in Japan because you're so active on this, or how do you see this, and what's the role for governmental policy in this?
Okay, thank you for that question. Everyone is talking about green steel and the definition of green steel. But without having the correct measure, we cannot define the definition of a green steel. So that's the reason behind the government of Japan, when we took the presidency of the G7, we started claiming that first we need to have a common measurement system. The background is that we all in the steel industry know that there is plenty of proliferation of calculation methodologies exist. All those calculation methodologies are fit for purpose, on specific purpose. In the case of, for example, in the case of Japan, our reporting to the government, site-based CO2 emission reporting to the government is based upon the energy saving law, such as the Indian PAT. Started from 1970s when oil shock hit Japan. So energy saving was a purpose. That's the reason because that's the reason why our reporting include not only scope 1 but also scope 2 emission numbers. You need to include the imported and exported energy to count to see the real energy efficiency of the site. While EU ETS system is only focusing on scope 1 because it is precisely calculate the emission from the site regardless of the imported energy or imported the supply, the scope 2 supply. So the different purpose, different calculation methodologies. So the proliferation of calculation methodologies are taking different scopes and different boundaries, including slug allocation, excluding slug allocation, including byproduct gas, the treatment, or excluding such and such. So we cannot compare apple to apple. Then those are the issues of the site-based calculation, which is much more simpler than product-based calculation. Current the integrated steel mill are producing hundreds of different type of steel using different input, different process, and different configuration of the process combination. So how to allocate the emission to specific product is a very, very big issue. And whether the required data are annual base average, daily base average, quarterly base average, every 5 years, depend on the granularity. And it's really complicating system. World Steel Association has been conducting the life cycle inventory assessment, the program in the past years, and it takes a lot of time. It's basically the product-based calculation, but really complicating because we need to divide the process into sub-processes and adapt to the specific product. So even World Steel has been reporting under the World Steel data collection, we are reporting every 5 years. If it is every year, it is very, very big problem and a costly process. So the question for the government, for the public, is what you want. Without a definition of a necessary database, we cannot come up with a fit-for-purpose calculation methodology. That is a message from the steel industry. Then, being the expert in the steel industry, we can come up with the right boundary, right scope, right the time schedule of such kind of reporting. That we have been discussing with IEA, which is the host of the G7 common measurement system. The second part of the issue, your question, the mass balance approach, that is what we started claiming. This is a way to recover our initial investment on the green process. Probably this is the only way we can get recovery from the costly the CO2 emission saving investment in the first stage, because there is no complete low carbon or zero carbon process exists yet in the world. Particularly in the big integrated steel companies, taking approach to gradually reduce emission. As this morning, the presentation, and OECD presentation also included that the major part of the emission reduction is the energy saving, which is more classical approach to reduce emission in a gradual manner, rather than jump to the zero carbon steel production. In that case, we need to get the customers' reward from the leading customer who want to pay the difference, who want to pay the cost of the reducing emission. But as I mentioned before, there is not many customers willing to pay that because steel is still the mass-produced commodity basic product material to the market. So we need to find out the leading customer who want to pay for their emission reduction in the scope 3. Japanese steel industry, together with ArcelorMittal, ThyssenKrupp, or even Nucor, started using mass balancing approach. That is allocating all the emission reduction achieved by the project to the specific product to get the greener steel. For the time being, probably between now and 2030, this is going to be the kind of market support, market creation mechanism. But problem is, it is very easy to be claimed that this is greenwashing, dubious, and how are you going to calculate, how are you going to verify? So we, Japanese Iron Steel Federation, developed our guideline, basic guideline, how to keep the reliability of the process, how to avoid double counting, how to assure the customers the additionality of a CO2 emission reduction from the projects. Now we introduced this guideline to World Steel, and World Steel is now discussing about the global level guideline on this mass balancing approach for the transition period, the greener steel, the marketing tool. So that's my background of this the initiatives.
Yeah, great. Thanks for giving us those insights. Maybe just to say to everyone that worldsteel has been working together with its members to establish some high-level principles related to mass balancing. It's not about whether we, how can I say, are recommending companies to use this, but as we heard, several of our members do have these schemes in place and are marketing products based on the mass balance. So we've published a set of high-level principles that are available on our website. And currently we do work with the working group to see if we can come up with some more detailed guidelines. So if you're interested in that topic, do have a look on our website. All right, I realize it's so interesting to hear what you're talking about that we're actually running, not late yet, but we don't have too much time. I do want to give you, Helene, enough time to talk about what's going on in Sweden before we break for coffee. And I'm particularly interested in the angles related, let's say, to startups, because the steel industry is not an industry where we typically see a lot of startup companies. But over the last few years, there's been quite a few announcements of new companies who obviously see, by the way, a business case in developing these green steels. And one of the most, let's say, talked about or probably first ones was in Sweden, H2 Green Steel. But that's not the only thing happening in Sweden. We also have hybrids, which has been referred to several times as well. So there must be something the Swedish government is doing right? I don't know if you can elaborate on why do you think these developments are happening in Sweden? Yeah.
Well, as several has been talking about, these things take time, I think, and it's also a mindset. As we heard the colleague from India, things has to develop over time. And I think in Sweden we have a long tradition on environmental legislation. We have a long tradition on CO2 tax. We have had that pressure for a long time. And then, of course, we had the emission trading for 15 years. We also had an ambitious national target for 2045, net zero emissions and beyond with negative emissions. So, and also in the OECD report saying that ambitious targets, national targets, also gives ambitious company targets. So all our companies know that this is the only way to be competitive. There is no alternative in the long run. We are very small in the steel world, but we have to be in the technical forefront and very specialized products. So the mindset is there. And of course, there is also the business opportunity, as you said. So both startups and existing operations see the market opportunity and the possibility of being early, being first. And of course, we have good, we have iron ore, we have fossil-free electricity so far. So the starting point is very good. But I think it's about being brave and also hoping that your politicians are being brave in the future. So I would say we have support from the government in the way that there are R&D support, not so much grants, because that's not the Swedish way of doing it. We're more into taxes and so on. But I think there are a pride in the country that we are in the forefront, and hopefully also the next step is to support industry with electricity, infrastructure, fast permitting to make this transition go on. And it's interesting, I mean, looking around the world and also from the OECD report, seeing the slide on assets age, and then you realize this has to be done in different ways in different parts of the world. I mean, in Europe and in Sweden, we also always talk about the transition, the investments has to be in timing with policy, or the other way around. And so I think that there's a need of different policies around the world, and that policymakers has to listen to steel industry. What do you want? What do you need? In Europe now, we perhaps don't need even more sticks. We need electricity, infrastructure, administrative support. So, and I think that's the ground for being ambitious. And I also, of course, when it comes to the market part, these companies that are on the front line, they see the market opportunity. They want to sell their steel with very low emissions, and then we definitely need this measuring standards to be able to make the customer being able to compare in a fair way.
All right, thank you very much. There are some pointers there for the people around the room. What is needed for companies to dare to be brave? We are just right now about to break for coffee, but it wouldn't be fair of me to not allow at least, let's say, 2 questions from the room. So I hope you bear with me for another 5 minutes if we do have questions in the room. Is there anyone who would like to? There's a question I see at the far back. You have to grab a microphone at one of the tables.
Hello there, everyone. I'm Andrew Forth. I work for Climate Group. We run a campaign called Steel Zero, which works with steel buyers to create the green demand of whatever word you want to call for it. I think it's really encouraging to see so much commitment on the stage and in this whole event to decarbonisation. But from a steel buyer perspective, one of the things that they want to see is greater transparency from steelmakers about the emissions associated with the products. It's hard to pay a premium for a green product if you can't then explain to your customers, explain to the public, and explain to your shareholders why you've done this. So I was just wondering, what steps do you think we can see to create that transparency around emissions associated with steel going forward?
I'll take a crack at that.
Please.
Yeah, I think one of the things that can be done is an approach that is taking hold in the U.S., where more and more emphasis is put on environmental product declarations, where you have EPDs for specific individual products that show their emissions profile. And then if you don't have an EPD for that product, then you're not eligible for government procurement programs. Most companies would prefer to have a supplier that gives them an EPD that shows the emission profile of the product. So I think that for this to work, it has to be at the product level, and there needs to be greater adoption and utilization of environmental product declarations.
All right. Let's do Helene first, and then Frank. And then,
yeah, definitely just agree, of course, but even EPDs are not always comparable, so we need international standards, and we should work on it together, because if steel industry agree on how the standard should be, then that's not a problem from the customer side.
Just agreeing with the 2 people here, but also perhaps adding that the word that hasn't been mentioned yet, CBAMs, it will set a standard for how carbon is measured in the European and the UK market. So there will be a very comparable and priced way of seeing for demand users what the carbon emissions are of the products, and it will be standardized according to the methodology used.
Yeah, interesting comment. We have the next session discussing CBAM. Yeah, please, Huang Dao.
Yeah. Chinese EPD promote communication with international peer-to-peer EPD programs, including EPD in Japan, in Italy, Sweden, Australia, Germany, United States, Australia, Norway, and Ireland, etc.
All right, great. We'll take one more question. Anyone? No, right. Okay. Everyone is needing coffee and probably to get out of the chair. So please join me in an applause for all our panelists and speakers. All right, we're now breaking for coffee. I'm afraid I've stolen 5 minutes from you, but we'll meet again here in the room at 3:30. Then you will see me on stage with another panel, and we'll be discussing CBAM and carbon markets. Thank you.